The first question that we're going to dig into tonight is a question with regards to originality of contributions. So the question is, how do I make an original contribution to my field of research? This is a question that comes up very, very often with students that land at Grad Coach, and there's a lot of uncertainty about what does original mean, what constitutes originality, how do we assess this? So David, how can students think about originality and ensure that they meet the requirements for their institution?
So I think first and foremost, they're not expecting you to win a Nobel Prize. They're not expecting you to change the very way that we do research. What they are looking for is that you are contributing something new to the field. And there are a range of contributions that you can do. You can do a theoretical contribution. So maybe you're extending theory, expanding on an existing theory or framework, and adding in a new idea or concept based on literature and support. The other type of contribution you can make is an empirical one. Maybe you are creating or looking at a research idea that's been done before, but you're looking at it within a new context. You're doing maybe something with a new population, maybe something in a new country or region, or maybe a specific context as well. So that's another type of contribution that you can do. You can also do a methodological-based contribution. So that's where you are expanding on methodology. So maybe you are seeing that there has been a ton of quantitative work done on a topic. There's clear relationships between the construct 1 and construct 2, but they're not really sure how that's working. And so you might be attaching a qualitative approach, or maybe you're extending the analysis. So you can always look into those type of contributions as well. You can also look at mechanisms as well, which ties in a little bit to the previous one. Maybe previous research has shown that a relationship exists and that there is a clear pattern that exists, but they're not sure why that pattern exists or what's causing it. And so that's something that you could explore as well. And then the last area, obviously this isn't a comprehensive list, is also replication with addition. So maybe you're redoing what a previous study has done, but you're adding to it. You're adding to it by improving the analysis, increasing the sample size, widening the sampling population. So maybe you're sampling a larger group of people or capturing different ethnicities, racial, gender, groups like that. And so there are a range of different ways that you can contribute to the research. Don't feel like you have to just find an entirely new idea and run with it. You can look at what existing ideas exist and then apply those in new contexts or approaches, or maybe combine two concepts or theories, see if they work as well. I think most importantly, though, is it's about how you argue what your contribution is. Too many students that we see come to us with this question are not arguing what their study is contributing effectively, and that's why they're getting pushback from their chair or committee members. So what you really want to do is, when you're presenting what your research contributes to the field, is you want to clearly indicate what's been done already, what hasn't been done, and why it's necessary to fill that gap. And then clearly indicate that that's what your study is setting out to do. And if you're able to do that effectively and communicate that clearly, maybe even mentioning one of those specific contributions I mentioned earlier, that can really help you to take that to the next level. But again, it also does depend on the level of study. So a master's degree, they're not looking for as unique a contribution as a doctoral dissertation. So always check in with your institution as well. And if in doubt, speak to your course manager or supervisor if you've got a good relationship with them as well. They'll also be able to guide and support you in making those kinds of decisions.
Great points, David. I think just to touch on a word that you used there, you spoke about that gap, that space in the research that hasn't been filled, and that's where your contribution lies. And my understanding, at least, is that we're speaking about the research gap there. And so it is so important that you have a strong understanding of what exactly is the research gap that you're aiming to fill, because that's kind of where your contribution comes from. We have a resource on the Grad Coach website that really unpacks the research gap, where we speak about the different kinds of research gaps, and you'll see there's a lot of overlap here with what David's just spoken about. And then we do also speak about how to find research gaps. So I will include the link for that in the chat. The only other thing that I'd add to that point is, as David mentioned, what constitutes contribution is definitely going to vary between levels of degree and even institutions and perhaps even fields and departments and whatnot. So this is not something where we can draw a hard line and we say that for a PhD, this constitutes contribution, whereas, this doesn't. So you definitely want to have a look. If you can, you want to get your hands on past dissertations from your department or that specific degree, and that will give you a good understanding of what your assessors will be expecting in terms of level of contribution. All right, let's jump on to our next question. And this question is, for independent researchers, how do I go about finding relevant and reliable sources for citations? So this question, at least as I understand it, is about access. Very often students struggle to get access to the papers that they feel are highly relevant, and they're behind paywalls. And these might be independent researchers, or it might just be someone who's applying to become a student in a doctoral program and hasn't yet got institutional access. So David, how do we work around this? And I know that even those who do have institutional access are still hitting these kinds of walls. It's always challenging getting access to the walled garden of academic resources and publications. How can students tackle this, David?
So I think probably the first thing to do is to take advantage of the search engines that are focused on open access research. So the top one is Google Scholar. Their other ones is Core, C-O-R-E, and the DOHA. These are different groups that actually collect together all the open access journals, all the open access articles, and keep it in one place. So they are databases that you can search. The great thing about that is they're based on open access. Google Scholar, not so much. Google Scholar covers everything, but Google Scholar does give you a PDF link if a PDF is available. And so that's the first thing that you want to do, is take advantage of the search engines that exist out there that already provide access to open access journals. Obviously, one caveat that I'll mention is when we're talking about open access journals, we can't speak about this without mentioning predatory journals. These are journals that are not necessarily properly peer reviewed. They're not accepted by research fields and institutions. And so it's always important to make sure that the journal you're assessing is of a reputable base. Great way to look at that is to look at any of the indexes. They differ between fields and topics, so I can't tell you exactly which ones to go to. I think there is a list, actually Beale's list, if I'm not mistaken, that talks about predatory journals as well. But once you've got some papers to work with, a really good thing to do then to find reliable connected research is to make use of tools that exist out there that allow you to find other related citations. Some common examples are Research Rabbit or Connected Papers. These are tools that you can see who's citing who in the research field. Connected Papers, for example, gives you a nice visual demonstration of that, and that also provides access to papers that can access as well. If you are an existing student and not an independent researcher, one of the things you can also do if you do come across a paper that your institution doesn't have access to is reach out to your librarian or your university library and ask them about interlibrary loans. So I'm from South Africa. We don't necessarily have access to all the top journals, but our university was able to loan access to those journals from international universities as well. And lastly, I think if you are an independent researcher and you are really looking to engage in this, you're going to want to look into the paid subscriptions that exist out there. So you can look at systems like Deep Dive, which collects together a whole bunch of resources, and they provide that access to you for a subscription. Deep Dive does have a free trial. So if you're at that early stage and you just want to get some papers together, definitely look into that. But in all of these cases, you want to take advantage of the resources that are out there. There are great sources that are legal and appropriate to use. Use those open access journals, take advantage of citation linking software, and then definitely, if you are part of an institution, go to the library. If you aren't part of an institution and you need access to a paper, contact the writer of the paper as well. So on all papers, they do have a author that's contact details are listed. You can email them and ask them for a copy of the paper as well. And in many cases, they'll send you a paper. If it's not the open access paper, they'll send you a preprint as well.
Great points, David. The perpetual challenge of access. But I think that last one is really an underrated one. Is very often, if you can just get in contact with the author, they're happy to share it. It strokes their ego.
Citation for them.
Exactly. All right. Let's jump on to the next question. This is a pretty broad question, but the reason I've brought it up is I think this can benefit a lot of students. The question is, how can a student with a 4.0 GPA struggle to produce a dissertation ready for defense? It feels like such a different task to what I'm used to. So this question really hits at the major difference between what is typically coursework in, say, a master's program, and then the research component. David, what advice would you share with students in this situation, or just students struggling to adjust from coursework through to formal academic research?
So I think first and foremost, it's important to note that this is a common struggle. This is a huge point of difficulty for many students. Students have been trained, they've been taught in their studies, through their schooling, to learn and to take in information and in some cases regurgitate it. Many good systems allow you to do some critical thinking as well. But really, we're being taught in schools and in our coursework how to understand and repeat work that's been done already. In a dissertation, they're looking at something completely different. They're really exploring and assessing and training you in an ideal world on the importance of developing your independent thinking and your ability to research. So they're not asking you to understand and repeat back what has been taught to you. They're asking you to take a look at a topic or a question and really explore it, dig deep, find your own answers, and more importantly, find your own gap in the research that you want to address. And so they're really testing and exploring your ability to do research, to develop an idea, develop a concept, and carry it from start to finish. So yes, essay writing does help prepare you a little bit for it, but it's a completely different bag of tricks. It also doesn't help that dissertations and theses have really specific criteria, expectations. It's a whole different language, academic writing. And so there are all these hurdles to overcome. Now, what you can do to sort of help you through that experience is read academic texts all the time. You want to be reading journal articles, you want to be reading dissertations and theses, and it's important to be reading both of those because a journal article is short, concise, and to the point. A dissertation is more about demonstrating your understanding, your learning, and your approach. And so there are some differences in those approaches, but by reading and really getting into that literature, you're going to get an idea of what the norms are, how to handle it. The other thing that you want to do is take advantage of any of the support structures that your institute offers or other ones that are offered elsewise. Grad Coach, for instance, we coach and provide support to students. You can also look at joining writing groups, and you can look at getting support from your writing center at your student institution as well. But really importantly, don't feel like you have to tackle it alone. One of the sort of misnomers about a dissertation is it's a lonely journey. It definitely is, but it doesn't have to be. So you can work with other people to get support and guidance. It's still going to be your work, but you don't have to walk that journey alone. I think the other thing that's worth mentioning is there's a function of scale here as well. An essay is never quite as much work as a dissertation. And so there's a huge jump between your studies and your coursework and the dissertation process as well. So I think it's really important that you're aware that that difficulty is going to happen. And when it does happen, you don't try and tackle it alone. Take advantage of the support systems that are out there. And also, we live in the era of the internet and AI. There are a ton of resources. There are books, there are chapters, there are journal articles about how to effectively write a dissertation. So look into those as well, because there are a lot of resources out there.
On that note, I'll just take the opportunity to point out some resources that we have within the Grad Coach Toolkit, which I think most people on this call probably already have access to. But certainly, if you're struggling to understand sort of what do I need to achieve, what do I need to hit in every chapter, our chapter checklists are really useful for that. So our chapter checklists are essentially a detailed checklist for each and every chapter, for the introduction chapter, literature review chapter, methodology chapter, giving you insight as to what are the boxes that you need to tick, for lack of a better term, in each of these chapters. Now, of course, that's going to vary from institution to institution, but at least it gets you out of that essay writing headspace and into the headspace of what do I need to be doing here. To David's other point, just about this being a much larger scale project than a essay or an assignment, this necessitates some project planning. It really is important to plot these things out. And so the reason I bring that up is that is yet another resource that we have within the toolkit. There is a dissertation project plan that you can go and essentially just pre-populate with all of the most common tasks and map out your dissertation so that you have a roadmap, that you're not just winging it and just doing a little bit every day and hoping for the best, because that is a dangerous strategy. So those are some resources that we have. Be sure to check those out. And of course, there's plenty other ones out there as well. I was going to jump to a question about methodology, but I think I'm going to jump into a question that's come through the chat here from Emmanuel. And the question is, what are some common mistakes that students make when writing a literature review? So the literature review is probably the number one obstacle that students come to us with at Grad Coach. That is often the space that they get stuck. There are many potential pitfalls that one might encounter. So David, in your experience dealing with reviewing hundreds, if not thousands of literature reviews, what would you say are some of the most common mistakes that students need to stay clear of?
I think there are a few that come to mind. Obviously, each of these are problematic in their own roots, but one of the first ones is really being biased in your coverage of the literature. It's very easy for a new student, or when they're doing their research, to only focus on studies that sort of support their idea or their plan. And so they will find papers that all point to the direction that they're looking at. If they want to prove a relationship exists between work satisfaction and employee engagement, they're going to look at only the papers that specifically support that view. So that's a huge mistake, because any reader or marker is going to know the literature well enough to know that there are differing views. That also ties into the next point, which is students focus on description rather than analysis or criticality. So they focus purely on saying what the studies have found and just do a descriptive coverage of all of those. So they'll say Johnson et al. Found X, Fred found Y, Bill found B. And so it just becomes this very boring and not very insightful coverage. What you really want to be doing is doing deep analysis. You want to be identifying what are the themes or concepts that are coming up in your literature. What are the contributions that the studies are making, and how do they relate to each other? You want to be looking for those opportunities where studies are in agreement, where studies differ in their findings, and then you want to take it a step further and engage with why that might be the case. So really, you're taking it away from just purely description to deeper analysis. You're looking at what they found, how they found it, how the studies relate to each other, and then what that means. And then always, probably the biggest one that is a gripe for me is the literature review that doesn't clearly point back to the gap in the research or the reason for the research. Many people take the literature review to be an opportunity to just prove that they know what's happening in the literature. Yes, it is showing that you have an understanding of the literature, but more importantly, it's about developing an argument for why your research is needed. The other thing that does come up is undercitation or overcitation. So undercitation is students just not engaging deeply enough with the literature. And as a result, their analysis feels a little thin, it feels a little limited. And then the opposite is students who get overwhelmed and really dive too deep into the literature. And then they get caught up in all of the different options and stories and findings that have been found. And as a result, the literature review becomes muddy and unclear. It lacks a clear purpose. So that's something that you always want to be making sure you're doing with your literature review, is that you've got a clear thread or golden thread running through that literature review, that everything you're including is contributing to either explaining, justifying, or clarifying what you're trying to show as well. Those are some of the common ones that come to mind, but there are a range of other ones that can come up as well. I think we do have a post on literature review common mistakes as well, so I'm sure we can link to that as well.
We certainly do. I think we've got a post and at least one or maybe two YouTube videos covering some of the common pitfalls and then also things that you definitely want to do. Emmanuel, thanks for your question. I see that there was a second part to this question, that is it acceptable to say that the evidence is incomplete or conflicting? I think this really ties into what David was just discussing, which is part of what you're doing in the literature review is critiquing the existing research, critiquing the current state of knowledge. And in some cases, that will mean that, yes, certain areas are incomplete or they're conflicting or contradictory, or that there's some heated debates about these things. And that's typically where your research gap will emerge from. So that certainly can be acceptable. Of course, the level of depth of critique will depend on your program, will depend on your institution, will depend on the project itself. But broadly speaking, within a literature review, certainly one of the things that you're doing is identifying the gap in the literature, very often by way of there being a lack of evidence or some conflicting evidence or conflicting positions within the research. So I hope that answers your question, and thanks again. Also, just a reminder to everyone else, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. That's what it's all about. So let me circle back around to the question that I was going to ask, and this is to do with the methodology chapter. And the question is, can you recommend a framework or a structure or some sort of map with which I can approach the writing of the research methodology chapter? I've got all these bits and pieces floating around in my mind. How do I put that down into a clear narrative?
So first things first, start with previous dissertations, ideally from your department. If you can't get from your department, look for dissertations in your field around your topic, because there are going to be differences in what's expected in the methodology chapter based on your field. So computer sciences is very different from social sciences, from medical research as well. So that's always going to be the first thing you can do to just get an idea of what the norms and expectations are. But then if you're particularly in the social sciences, or maybe also in the psychology and those spaces, great resource you can use is Saunders Research Onion. It's a tool that exists that just helps you think through how to develop your research, how to frame your research steps. And that starts from your philosophy, moves through your research design, to your approach, to population sample, and it helps you work through all of those design decisions that you need to follow. The other thing that I can mention is you can definitely look at our grad coach resources as well. We've got a methodology checklist that exists out there, but really importantly in the methodology chapter, the core of what you want to be achieving with this chapter is clearly conveying what you did or plan to do, justify why you have made those decisions, and then explain how it was done in practice. And importantly, with methodology chapter, it has to be comprehensive and clear enough that someone can take your dissertation and repeat your research and get not the same results because it will be a different sample, but they should be able to repeat your study. The other thing that you want to think about is making sure you're covering all of the key aspects of your research. So your design, your sampling, your data collection, your analysis, and then also engaging with potential limitations as well. That would be my quick and dirty approach to it. But again, we've got a bunch of resources. We've got the methodology checklist. So we've got this article here on Saunders Research Onion. And Saunders has even reached out to us saying he's really keen that we're using his Research Onion at Grad Coach.
Yeah, love it or hate it. There's some heated opinions about the Research Onion within Grad Coach, but it is certainly a great framework for those who are feeling stuck. I think part of the challenge in terms of presenting one's methodology is that these choices are so interlinked. There's so much coupling that happens at these different layers, and it becomes challenging to fit that into a narrative, especially when you're describing not just what you did, but why you did it, why you made these choices. And so there is always a bit of a tension in terms of how do you present your master plan? How do you present that neatly? But I just really want to highlight the one point that David made is don't forget the why. You definitely want to describe what you did. You definitely want to describe how you did it, how you implemented it, but a lot of students fall short on the why. And to go back to the purpose of the dissertation being, as David mentioned a little bit earlier, demonstrating that you have the ability to think critically and evaluate sources and then undertake your own analysis of data, collection of data, et cetera, what they're wanting to see is, do you have the ability to choose the right tools for the job? So are you choosing interviews when interviews are suitable for your research question? Are you choosing some sort of quantitative analysis when that is perhaps more suitable for your question? So it's all about alignment, is something we speak about so often. So make sure that all of your decisions are aligned and that you demonstrate that through your discussion of why you chose these various things.
I think one thing that I will add as well in relation to the justification is it can sometimes feel a little difficult to know, how do I justify this approach? It's because my supervisor told me you can't use that in your dissertation. But what you really want to tie it back to is your research question, your aims, your objectives, and what you're setting out to achieve. If you can really clearly paint the picture of why the methodology you've chosen is the most appropriate to answer your question, it really helps with that justification if it's clearly aligned to your research question. Because as a marker, that's the first thing I'm looking for is, will the methodology they've chosen answer their research question? If it doesn't, I'm concerned. And so that's always the most important justification, is tying that to the research question and then supporting with literature as well.
Fantastic. All right, on to the next question that we have lined up here. And I think this is probably going to be our last question for today. I see we're running up against the clock. This is one that students suffer with and struggle with all too often. And the question is, how do I go about trimming out and editing down this monster of writing that I have put down? Some students struggle to get words down onto the paper. Some students struggle to stop putting words down onto the paper. And I think many students kind of swing between those two modes throughout the dissertation process. So, David, how do students go about, what are some practical techniques that they can use to edit down and to just trim out the fluff and get their writing down into something that's impactful but concise?
Definitely one of the first things, and this was something that my master's supervisor taught me, which was really great, is move from passive to active voice. That's the first thing you can do to really trim down and get focused with your research. As soon as you're using active voice, you're cutting out a lot of fluff words and making it more impactful and convincing as well. So that's a high level, quick and easy tip that you can use. Obviously, it does depend on your institution and the expectations, but most universities have moved towards active language as the preferred approach, and it is much easier to write as well. Secondly, you want to focus on what is your golden thread. And the golden thread is, what is it that you set out to achieve? What is it that you did to achieve that? What did you find, and what did it mean? If you take a look and build that golden thread for yourself, make a paragraph for yourself that just clearly indicates what are the key points of your research. You're going to use that then as a test against any content that you're writing or working with. You're going to ask yourself, is this contributing to addressing my golden thread, or is it unrelated? If it's unrelated, feel free to cut it. Obviously, you need to make sure you have enough background, but you don't need to cover all the tangents, all the rabbit holes as well. What I do advise, though, is if you're cutting content, editing content out, don't just hit the delete button. Copy that out, paste it in a document separate to your actual draft, because you never know, there might be really good ideas there. There might be concepts that maybe they don't fit your dissertation, but would be really great to explore later on in subsequent research. Maybe you come back to that topic and your supervisor suggests a modification. So don't necessarily get rid of your sections that you're cutting, but definitely move them out of the document. Focus on that concise, focused story. I think then you also need to assess what is contributing to that message versus what is muddying that message as well. So related to this previous point is you want to make sure that you are not writing about a topic or concept in a way that is distracting from the point of your paragraph. Most paragraphs should start with a key statement, your opening point, and then what follows should develop from that as well. So when you're editing, when you're cutting content, cut content that doesn't fit with your topic sentence. Make sure your topic sentence is followed by a few sentences that support the idea, and then analyze or interpret that and the next steps. The other thing that you can do to help with the editing process is don't do it alone. It's so easy for people to think they have to do it all themselves, but you can draft something together and then give it to a friend or family member. A good dissertation should be understandable to a lay audience. It should provide enough detail to get across the points you're trying to make. If you find that your friend is saying, hey man, this feels unnecessary, or I don't know why you included that, that's a really good sign that maybe that's not necessary, or if it is necessary, you need to tighten up your language there as well. You can also go through drafts with your supervisor or committee if they're open to that, or you can look for coaching support or writing groups as well. They're going to be opportunities to get a second set of eyes to look at your work and really identify what is key to your message and what is not key to your message. Those are just some high-level suggestions. I am aware that we're coming up to the end of the time, so I don't want to take up too much.
I think I just want to echo what I feel is the most important sort of heuristic there that David's mentioned is you want to evaluate when you're sitting on a pile of words and you're trying to figure out how do I trim this thing down. You want to always use your golden threads. Essentially, from a practical perspective, want to go through every paragraph and say, okay, does this contribute or doesn't it contribute? And if it does, cool. If it doesn't, then you want to store it in that bank that David's mentioned, or you want to ask yourself, how can I trim this down to be as concise as possible because it's not really adding a tremendous amount of value. So I know that sounds like an oversimplification, and to an extent it is, but it is very simple. It's just not very easy. One of the many things that are simple, not easy within the dissertation process. Use your research aims, your research questions, and your research objectives as a filter for all of the stuff that's in your document, and then trim it all down, and then have a read through, and you'll find that, okay, you just need a little bit of polishing to get it all to fit together again. But very often there is a huge amount of content that can be cut out just using that filter.
It's important to also remember when you're cutting, when you're editing, is that this is an iterative process. So a lot of people feel like I write my draft, I edit it once, and I'm done. Unfortunately, in academia, that's not the way that it works. You're going to be reading it probably 10, 15 more times. So whenever you make edits and cut content, do always go back and check that your flow still makes sense, that your narrative, that your golden thread is still key, because it's really easy sometimes to do the hard cut and say, okay, this is a tangent. It's not really helping. I'm going to remove these 2 paragraphs. But if you just remove those paragraphs and don't tie the preceding paragraph to the following paragraph, that leads to a break in the narrative as well. And that's something that supervisors, markers, readers are going to notice, and it's going to confuse them or disrupt your flow. So always just iterate a few times. Do an extra edit, do an extra read through, get someone to read through it, make some changes, do it again. That's unfortunately the nature of academic work, is we are always iterating.
All right, so we are going to have to wrap it up there. Unfortunately, we are up against the clock. I know that there are questions that we haven't got around to. We will certainly add those to the list for our next Q&A session. So do keep an eye out for that. But if you do still have any questions, if you're interested in working one-on-one with one of our grad coaches, you are more than welcome to book a consultation. Here's the link. You can also scan the QR code. You can just as easily go to the grad coach website and click the book a consultation link, and that will get you to the same place. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, David, for answering all these questions. We will keep you posted on what is happening next. David, what is the next date for the Q&A? February?
It is the 3rd of Feb, and we're going to be focusing in on the literature review chapter as well. So that's going to be the focus of that session as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you all again. That's it from us today, and hopefully we see you again at the next Q&A. Cheers, everyone.